Hi, my name is Mike Moore, and I'm going to show you getting started with minitest-rails. To use minitest-rails, we're going to create a new to-do application. And to do that, we're going to use Ruby 193 and Rails 326. When we create this Rails application, we're going to go ahead and skip the test unit framework. Minitest-rails can live side by side with test unit, but if you have a brand new app, you can go ahead and skip test unit and only install minitest. Installing minitest is pretty simple. There's only really two steps. The first step is to add it to your gem file. And then the next step is to run the install generator, which will add a new helper file. To install it to your gem file, we're going to create a new group for development and test environments and specify minitest-rails gem there. After we do that, of course, we need to pay homage to the bundler gods. And once we're there, we can take a look at all of our generators. So here's our list of generators. You can see that all of the existing generators, model, scaffold are still there. But now we have this new minitest install generator. We're going to go ahead and run that, and it's going to create our helper file and our test directory for us. Now that that's there, let's take a look at our helper file. This should look pretty familiar. It's not too different from the standard test helper file. It's named different just so they can both live side by side. Let's go create a new scaffold for our task in our to-do app. A task is going to have a name and a completed at date. So let's go ahead and create that. Now when we run a scaffold, it's going to run a lot of other generators. It's going to run our model generators and our test generators. Because we installed minitest-rails, it is now registered as our default test framework, and it's going to generate all of those files for us. The big difference between test unit and minitest is that the files are not located under unit or functional. They're located under what they're testing. So here we're going to test our task model, and we're just going to change the default test to something just a little more appropriate. We're just going to assert that this task class constant actually exists. Before we can test that, we need to run the migrations and pay homage to the Rails gods this time. We're also going to prepare our test database. We're going to do that because the minitest models rake task doesn't do that for us, but the rake test task will. So that passes. Let's go ahead and change this. This is kind of a test unit style test. Let's go ahead and change it to more of a RSpec style test. And we're going to use the minitest spec DSL. This should look pretty familiar if you're familiar with RSpec. We're going to have a describe block here for our task, and then we're going to have an it block for our actual test. The test it should exist, and we're going to have the same assert. I prefer asserts over the must or should style. And that's functionally the same test, only it's just written a little bit differently. So let's make a little bit better test. Let's require something on this task object, and let's make sure that the name is there. So to do that, we're going to create a new task object, and we're just going to check to see that whether it's valid based on the presence of the name. Since we didn't give it a name, it should not be valid. So we're going to assert that it's not valid. Let's go ahead and run this test. Now this is going to fail because we haven't implemented this feature yet. So there's a failure. Let's switch back and open up our task model. And let's go ahead and make name a required field. We can do that by validating that it has a name. And of course it would help if I could spell presence. There we go. Okay, let's rerun our test. It was failing before, and now it's passing. Let's take a look back at this test. Now, I don't like asserting a negative, but minitest gives us the refute method, which will kind of invert that for us. Let's run our test again to make sure that that continues to pass. And it does. And we can add a little bit more to this test, make it a little more specific. If it's not valid, we want it to be valid because there's an error on name. So we can add this here. That's the walkthrough. Pretty easy to set up, pretty easy to use. Please check it out and give us some feedback. We really appreciate it.